Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone watching this. Thank you for tuning in. And yes, you have entered the Game of Dragons TV. Welcome. And I am your host, Ms Oshun. So I like to just say that I'll have to apologize because I have not been dropping content the way I would like. But that is because I have been on a hiatus, medical hiatus, and technically I'm on bed rest. But today I'm cheating, and I just wanted to come and make this video for you guys today because I have had this on my chest for a very long time. And so I wanted to just get out there. And now that I have some time and I'm kind of rested and I have a few moments, just get this in. And you guys know how I am. I don't like long intros. So let's just get right into the video. As you already know, based on the name and why you clicked on this, it's called Black Mud Altar, the Sumerian Quran Connection. Let me see. Actually, let me look at this. This is a connection. All right. Okay. Hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning in once again. You are rocking with Game of Dragons TV. Welcome. I am your host, Ms Oshun, and thank you for tuning in today. I have been on a bit of a medical hiatus. I have been on bed rest, and I am technically still on bed rest, but I have had to come in and create this video for you guys because it's been on my mind for a very long time. So, without further ado, as you guys know, I love to just jump right into my videos. I don't like long intros. I hate that. So let's fly, okay? So as you guys can see, the name of this show is called Black Mud Altar, the Sumerian Quran Connection. Now, I know that a lot of times when you've heard this conversation about the Sumerian epic and creation stories, or myths as they call it, it's been in relation to the biblical account or accounts in other religions. Islam has really been, as they say, taboo, right? You can't talk about the Quran as it pertains to the Sumerian epic of creation because these two are not separate. These two are separate, and you just can't talk about it. But today I'm going to talk about it. And again, I want everyone to know that this is my opinion based on my studies, and I stand to be corrected. However, if you want to correct me based on the merit of the information, not your faith or what you think is your opinion, because as you can see, I just gave you my opinion. Okay, so that doesn't count. Of course, if you want to leave a comment and let your thoughts be known, I welcome that. I do respond to comments sometimes if they're thought provoking enough. However, if you just want to get your rocks off because you're feeling some kind of way, uh, feel free. Just feel free. So, without further ado, I want to just go into my thoughts on this, right? So, let me be clear about something. The Quran confirms the Sumerian creation myth in terms of what has been written on the tablets that has been found coming out of what is considered today as ancient Sumeria. So, with that being said, I know there's a lot that has to be explained because there's so many things that in present day culture and understanding that seems to go against everything that the Quran stands for. And what I'm not here to do is to say the Quran is wrong or the Quran is a lie. I do not believe that. My intention today is to show that the way we understand the Quran is where the problem is, not the Quran itself. So while we may say, well, there's no connection, these things are blasphemous, in fact, there is a connection and it's not blasphemous. And it's really just the way we're reading the Quran and how it affects our psyche when we encounter other stories that seem to be so outside of our understanding, that we're just willing to say, I just want to keep the Quran and what I know about the Quran, and everything else just is just trash. That is a psychological deficiency, in my opinion. But the first thing I want to address is the contradiction that a lot of people, especially non-Muslims, seem to have about the Quran in terms of the creation of mankind and or the universe or Earth. Now, the first things first is that the major contradiction, because I'm not going to go through everything, but the major contradiction that I have heard is that the Quran, when it speaks about the amount of time that it took to create every aspect of creation, things are different and things are shifting, right? And thus, this creates this sense that, well, the Quran is contradictory, and we can't decipher the truth because obviously it's been, you know, tampered with, and there's contradictions, right? However, I would beg to differ on that, and not because contradictions cannot exist in the Quran. There are contradictions. This is written by mankind. There are mistakes, there's grammatical errors, there's a bunch of stuff. However, every source of information is a source of information. And if, you know, our creator has given us a sense of intelligence and understanding, then I think we will be okay when it comes to how we approach these topics, even with said contradictions and mistakes. So, with that being said, in reference to the different days that the Quran speaks about, when it says, you know, certain things were created in 2 days, 4 days, 8 days, and it goes back and forth. Let me say this. First of all, there's certain things that human beings just are having trouble conceiving in terms of time, in terms of creation, that we're still grappling with. When we talk about time, right, we don't really understand if time is moving linear or in a circle. And if it moves in a circle, we're having a psychological conundrum in terms of, well, what is reality if time is moving in a circle? And so we're still grappling with those things because we haven't really evolved enough to be able to have a full understanding psychologically of said things. So when the Quran says that, you know, the creator speaks to us in a way that we can understand, although it's referencing the creator of all that exists, I truly believe that whatever entity, and I mean that in terms of physical entity, that is relaying this message, okay, because this was a message, quote unquote, relayed by not the creator, but an angel, a being, to a man that we call Muhammad, the prophet from the 5th century. We're still talking about beings here. And if that being is recorded in the Quran as saying that the Quran will only speak to you in a language that you understand, let's be clear. The message clearly was in the language he could understand, but that's not what that really meant. Like, it's not what that meant. And what I mean by that is this: if someone is speaking to me in English and we're talking, and then they say, the message that I'm going to give you is going to come to you in a language that you understand. Clearly, we've been speaking English this entire time. I know that. So, what are you really saying when you say the message is going to come to me in a way that I understand? We're talking about something deeper here than just Arabic. And I know a lot of Muslims say that's what that verse meant, that God sends a message down in every language that everyone can understand. Meanwhile, we don't have quote unquote kitabs in every single language. Like, we don't. So what is the Quran talking about? It doesn't mean that the Quran is lying or it's a contradiction. What it's getting at is a deeper meaning to the idea of what you can understand. So when the Quran, getting back to the days and time, is speaking of, well, it took, for instance, it took 2 days to create the planet, right? We don't really understand 2 days. We don't, because the Quran made it clear when the sun was created, when the moon was created, and how we understand one day. The Quran is not talking about that. Whatever we're talking about, it's not what we understand as a quote unquote day, a day. That's not it. And the fact that that is the closest thing that it can use for us to understand means that at some point we have to acknowledge that this is beyond our understanding, and that yes, we may get there, but we're not there right now, or at least we wasn't there back in the 5th century. Like, the people that were speaking and being spoken to, We're not there in the 5th century, like, to understand certain things that's, I guess, a common knowledge now. So I don't want people to take away from this that, there are contradictions. Rather, there's a space and place for us to ponder on, as the Quran says, on the message, because there's certain things you're not going to get simply from reading it. You will only get from actually pondering on the message and being open to whatever guidance comes to you. And that's not something that's relegated just to the Quran. Like, the Quran is not the only source of information and knowledge when it comes to spirituality, life, and what reality is. That it's not the only source, but it is a source. So, let's roll with that, as I say, right? I want to specifically go into, like, the 2 days things with the planet, because I think there's something to really be interpreted there. When the Quran speaks about the creation of the earth, right, in 2 days, it also speaks about the creation of the 7 heavens directly after. So essentially, it's saying that whatever entity created the planet in 2 days, it turned at that time and created the heavens. Now, we're understanding the heavens as space itself, space, right? Meanwhile, that doesn't make any sense. You can't create a room in a house that don't exist. You have to have a house so that a room can happen, right? You can't have a room and it's not inside of anything. Like, it's just, like, that doesn't make any sense, right? At least from what we're understanding rudimentary wise when it comes to the planet Earth. So we have to ask ourselves, what is the Quran really talking about when it says the earth was created in this amount of time, and then after that something else was created? We tend to think that the word heavens is referencing the 7 layers of the planet. However, the Quran made clear it created the earth, meaning everything that came with the earth, including the atmospheric layers, and then it made 7 heavens. So what is a heaven? See what I'm saying? Now, that's everyone is open to their interpretation on that. But when it comes to my point here, I want to say that the word heaven, in my opinion, is referencing a place, and these are different places. And it could be that the Quran is saying that not only was this planet created, but other planets were created, other places like this or not like this, or places that is in conjunction with this place was created. There were 7 other planets created, obviously. It could be speaking about other places, like in any exotic way. However, it's not talking about atmospheric levels on the planet. You understand? Like, that is taken away from the Quran in a way that I think is very gross and leads to a lot of misinterpretation and a lot of people thinking, oh, well, the Quran is being contradictory when it comes to this. When in reality, it's not being contradictory. You're just not thinking in the correct way about this to understand. Now, I think it's also interesting that the Quran is speaking of the creation of the earth, and the assumption is the creation of the earth from nothingness, right? When we look at, for instance, the biblical account, and a lot of Muslims know that the Quran says it came to clarify what was in the Quran, what was in the Bible, and what it did not clarify, what it left out, is what it's okay with. The biblical narrative of the creation of the earth is not that, quote unquote, God created the earth from nothing. No, it's when God decided to create this planet, this physical thing that we're walking on already existed. It was just void. It was like a water planet. Like, it was nothing here. It was no land. There was nothing, but there was water here. It was a water planet. And so then, God decided to say, let there be da 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 da. Now, God says, let there be, that can be interpreted a certain way. I'll probably get into that in a different video in terms of what I believe that it is. However, the point is, God did not sit and say it created this planet and all planets from nothingness and it all came into being nice and smooth. No, this was already here when God decided to create it, right? So when it says God created the earth, we can safely come to the conclusion that it's not saying God created the physical planet, but God created the environment that we understand as a planet that is livable. So, I thought that was very interesting. And keep in mind, I'm only interpreting different interpretations from the Quran that it has been written in English. There's several interpretations of the Quran from different scholars. I tend to use the top five and put them all together. But because I don't know a lot of Arabic. However, I don't think that the Arabic is the issue. I think the concept is the real issue with people getting stuck at. No matter what language you speak, it's the concept that we're stuck in. We want to believe that the God of creation is doing everything. Meanwhile, the God of creation isn't the God that sat down and created the internet. No, it through its will, it allows for that to happen, but we created the internet. We actually put it together, put up the signs, all that. We did that, and now we have an internet. So that doesn't mean that the God of creation doesn't exist, but we have to intelligently place these things in order in which it actually exists. There's certain You are a whole person, a whole body, right? However, you're not paying attention to what's going on in your stomach lining right now. You know nothing about it until your stomach sends you a message saying something's wrong. But you are a whole person. Why aren't you paying attention to that? That's not how it works. You see what I'm saying? So let's kind of give this understanding to the same understanding we give like that to ourselves. Let's give it to this concept within the Quran without over religiousizing it, because I do understand it can get real religious real quick, but I'm going to try my best to keep it out of that realm. So let me continue on. That was just a point I wanted to cover. Now here's another thing, right? There's another assumption, which is that the Quran is speaking of a planet that's been created here, like this planet. Like that's the assumption, that the Quran is talking about planet Earth, the one we're physically on right now, right? And there's enough room in the Quran to let's say argue that that may not be the case. See what I'm saying? It may not be the case. Now, I want to believe that when it comes to, because I'm going to get into the connection between the Sumerian creation myth, but I want to believe that when it comes to the Quran, this is a message that has not been given before its time. Meaning that at this point in time, when humans received this message, they were ready for something that had never came before them. And there's a lot of things in the Quran that you do not find in any book prior to it, in terms of human beings, in terms of our reasoning for existing, in terms of our future. So, I really do believe that a lot of people are reading this book from a religious standpoint and from a Christian mindset on top of things, and it's distorting the message. And I'm just going to do my best to kind of clear up some of that. Like I said, there's this assumption that the Quran is speaking about planet Earth, as in our planet. And I don't necessarily believe that. Inside of the Quran, in verses 724, it talks about getting down to earth, and that this will be a place where you will be for a time, meaning this is not a permanent resting place for you, in reference to the first, one of the first, if not the first human being, Adam, and his being expelled from the garden. This is what this is in reference to. And other verses like chapter 2, verse 36, where it again tells mankind in terms of the expulsion from the garden to get down to earth. And again in chapter 20, verses 123, get down to earth, as in leave this place and go to the planet, or manifest on the planet, however you want to interpret that. So I think that is incumbent upon us to really understand that yes, there is the possibility that what was created, right, the planet that was created, is not necessarily speaking about this planet. This may be one of the 7 heavens that was created after the original planet was created, where the first man was, placed in. See what I'm saying? Clearly inside of the Bible, it talks about Adam and his wife leaving the garden, and something being put in front of it so that they can't find their way back. Now, that, that's a hard shot to make based on the word there. However, it is interesting that this garden still exists on the planet, but nobody knows where it's at, according to the narrative. It still exists. It's just nobody knows where it's at. Um, yeah, that's very interesting. But there's some points that I want to bring up in regards to that, just so we can kind of like uh, go over that and just kind of ponder on it a bit, right? Um, when we talk about the grandson, I think the great grandson of Adam, which we're referring to as what's known in present day as Noah, right? His name generally means to rest, right? Now, if I'm not, now this is just my understanding. When parents name their children, they typically do not name their children things that fit into a narrative. Like, just conveniently, all of the characters in the book's name mean exactly what they did in the book. That seems to be something that is unlikely, very unlikely. And this is what I mean. It's like we're reading a story and we're not really picking up on these subtle cues that are leading us to a different conclusion. So this word Noah, right? We do understand that there's been other names for this individual, and other names for this individual. It kind of goes into some of the creation myths in Sumeria that seems to be in alignment with this narrative in terms of the flood myth coming out of Sumeria or ancient Babylon or Akkadian. This is what I mean by that. Like, we know that the word Noah was not the name of the actual person that we believe actually went through that event. This is a name that has been given to him, and we call it the person that rested, right? Or came to a stop. Okay, now catch where I'm going. Okay, the name means to rest, meaning to come to a stop. That's all. That's what I'm gonna say about that. Okay, pair that with, we're talking about a catastrophe, and it's being said that the catastrophe is there was a flood that took over everyone, right? However, we don't have any evidence of a major flood on the planet, given that the planet was originally a water planet. However, that doesn't mean that something else didn't take over and totally decimate the planet that people were on, if not this planet. That doesn't mean that. You see what I'm saying? So, what we're talking about is a person that came to a rest after a catastrophe happened, right? Like that he escaped. Now, if we keep thinking of it in terms of water, right, that could land us in some problems because, again, we're relegating it to this planet, right? And we're relegating it to that specific catastrophe when in reality, what if something else happened and that was the closest word that the ancients could understand, as in this was a catastrophe? I know that in certain studies we have found that on different planets we have evidence of nuclear warfare that literally decimated the entire planet and left the surface of it at like Mars, where there's a little to no atmosphere. Was that water? No. We know that there was water on Mars at some point, but there's nuclear fallout everywhere. So I just want to again caution in terms of the literal nature of the narrative. So moving forward, we have this person that came to a rest based on a catastrophe carrying life forms, like in his abode, right? Now we've been told that he was in a boat, right? At that time when this story was being stated, that was the only means of travel long distance that they understood, was a boat. So it's like, well, what if he was traveling in something else? I know in the biblical narrative it talks about, well, God gave him specific dimensions and how to build this boat. But when people have recreated those same dimensions, it has came to the point where people know that's a lie. These dimensions do not fit a boat that could carry every single life form on this planet. And let's be clear about something. The life forms on the planet at the time where they think that this flood happened, it does not match up. Are we talking about woolly mammoths or are we talking about whole dinosaurs? What are we talking about? But the truth is, we know that those aren't the animals that came off of that boat with the guy that we understand as Noah. We're talking about a new breed of animals that we understand as, the animals we have today, not anything else. Now, if you know anything about evolution, you know that there has not been enough time for animals of today to have evolved since the last ice age. That it just hasn't been enough time. However, they're still here. So we know they got here somehow. But the only thing we have is a story from about a man carrying different life forms on a craft, escaping some sort of catastrophe. Now, like I'm saying right now, let's not relegate that to this planet. You understand? Because when we get down to the point of the dove, right? I thought that was pretty interesting that the he whatever he was in it to a place in a sense where he couldn't tell what was going on a planet. He needed to send something else outside. Now, just suppose that something happened on a planet where Adam and Eve actually existed, and that planet got decimated by a flood, and there was one person and his family that was taken off of that planet and put inside of a craft, and that craft had genetic material on it of every animal that they would need or any planet would need to restart itself. And he was taken to one of the other heavens, okay, which was available. And what happened was the heaven that we're on right now was where he came to rest at. But he didn't come to rest here immediately. He sent out a probe that told him if this planet was habitable or not. You understand? And when the probe didn't come back, then he knew, oh, this planet actually has a place to actually rest on, because we can tell from whatever this probe is doing or not doing, signal or no signal, this is a good thing, right? Like, this is a good thing when it doesn't come back. But if it comes back, this is a bad thing. It means, like, no, we're saying dove, but in reality, this could be just a bit of information that's leaving out and coming back in to say, hey, there's no life on this planet. This isn't the one you can land on. Versus it can be. But again, we're talking about language that people understood at that time. The Quran is not going to speak in a way that people don't understand. You understand? Like, this, it's not going to do that. But to just kind of hone down on that point once again, the Quran also speaks about space travel. And it says specifically that human beings will not travel space unless they have permission to do so. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't have permission, but it is establishing that there is a hierarchy out here in the space streets, and it literally says that. And we will get to that later on in the video if we have time. But I thought that was pretty interesting. So these are things that I'm saying is worth pondering on in terms of the Quran expressing itself in a way that we can understand. Now, where this conjoins with the Sumerian epics is this. Inside of the Sumerian epics, generally speaking, you have a story of a people coming to a planet that could suffice what they needed from it, okay? And as a result of coming to this planet, it wasn't in the right form that they needed it in when they first came. So therefore, they decided to terraform the planet, and it took a while, okay? And once it was terraformed, they came here trying to essentially create a whole new world for themselves, for whatever they needed it for. Now, obviously, according to the story, there was a catastrophe of some sorts on their planet, and they had to leave. And it's like, and they had to build spaceports and all of that. And so if you notice these two stories, you have the same concepts in the same order. You understand? Like the same order. Issue on a planet, leaving and having to carry everything you need with you in terms of animals specifically, right? And or plants. And then having to look for a place where there's life, where you can actually rest, like some place like on a planet where you can actually come down to. And then you finally come down when there is land available for you to come down in. So this is what I'm saying. The Quran isn't necessarily telling us anything different from the Bible per se, although I can prove that the Bible is a retelling of these other stories. However, the Quran is giving us a little bit more information than what we had in the Bible in terms of what we're talking about. Now, again, this is not to say that Noah or Noah, I forgot how the Muslims call him, but this is not to say take away from who he is, if in terms of his prophecy, in terms of his special unique place in humanity. But it is to say that the Quran has given us a timeline and a story, and if we put it together right without thinking of it in terms of like how children might come to the conclusion that, hold on, there's more to this story than what happened here on this planet. And like the Sumerian epic, our beginning did not start with, oh, we just popped up on the planet. No, there was something that happened, a catastrophe that led to different events that led to the reason why we even had to be created in the first place. And so this is why I think, honestly, with the biblical reasoning, there's two different accounts. But that's a different story. I'm speaking about the Quran right now. Now, I want to go into another issue, which is the issue that people make in terms of contradictions in the Quran coming from how mankind physically came to be in terms of their creation. I know that people have said, well, in one instance, the Quran says that mankind was made from a clot of congealed blood in verses 96, 1 through 2, and then turns around in chapter 25 and makes a reference to them being made from water. Then in chapter 15, 26, turning around saying they were made from sounding clay. That word sounding is interesting in terms of the concept of the type of clay we're talking about. Okay, talking about moving clay. And then in chapter 30, verses 20, we're talking about mankind being made of dust. See what I'm saying? Which is not, it's not water, but it's earth in a sense. Okay. And then in verses, chapter 29, 67, I think, it's talking about mankind being made from nothing. You understand? So, and literally. And then there's the overarching idea from the writer, which is the writer's opinion, is that when God says for a thing to be, it is, right? That is not the Quran telling you this is how we came to be. That's just saying, listen, whatever the will of God is whatever the will of God is. But the issue is, why all these different means of how we came together, right? There has been people that have said that the Quran is very wrong, as well as the hadith that explain the Quran, that the way human beings come to be is not bones first and then flesh. Like that's not how it actually happens. However, the Quran is not speaking about how humans come to be naturally between each other. We have to keep that in mind. Whatever the Quran is talking about, it is not talking about the general process of how human beings come together. And the one thing I like about the Quran is that it doesn't hide the fact that how we began is very different than how we begin right now. Like it is. And obviously this goes to show that we are not a natural species. We are a species that was created, yes, but we are not a natural species in terms of how we came to be. The Quran makes it very clear in what it says and what it doesn't say, that we did not evolve. We were created as we are right now. We did not evolve from any type of primordial ape, regardless of what we may be made from. We did not evolve at all. Like, we have been here the same way I am here with you right now. Is the same way Adam looked and was inside of his walk in life. He was not some different type of prototype of human being. That's not what that was. So when we look at that, and then we juxtaposition that with the Sumerian epic that literally says the same thing, that human beings did not evolve, they were created, and they were created for the same purpose that just so happens the Bible says that it was created for, in terms of keeping, the earth, keeping the garden that was created or whatever, and the Quran not correcting that. Okay, like we're talking about the same thing, but different books are giving you different pieces of the puzzle. And this is what's interesting to me, because we're getting different pieces of a puzzle. And my only understanding is the reason we're getting different pieces is because this is what we can handle at this point in our existence here on this planet. And granted, we are evolving in a way that we are intellectually evolving, I think, and maybe spiritually, but we're not at a place where we can just be told the truth and it not hurt us in a way to just be told that. I think our beginnings is very, I'm gonna be honest with you, sinister. And this is why we can't really accept the truth of who and what we are all at once. So there's this effort to educate us on ourselves over time as a species and not all at once. To take it further, there is a place in the Quran, it's chapter 23, verses 12 through 14, where it talks about how it says, we created man from wet earth and placed him as a drop of seed in a safe place, lodging. And then we fashioned the drop of clot, and the clot we fashioned bones, and we clothed the bones with flesh, and we produced another creation. You understand? And so it's obviously the idea of we is always a question, but I'm not going to indulge inside of the we conversation here. But I do want us to talk about and really focus in on the way human beings came to be here, because when we turn to a different section inside of the tablets, we're going to see that there has been an exotic way that human beings have came to be, more so than what the Quran actually explains, because this on the surface does not sound correct. It just doesn't sound correct. We were made from dirt, dust, blood, which is a combination of different elements, and we were made from water at the same time. Our bones came to be first before our flesh. Like, what's going on? Like, if you're taking this literally, this is confusing and it's actually hogwash. But if you look at this in a way and sit back and ask yourself, when it talks about being created from wet earth, what are we talking about? Earth. What are we talking about? The word Adam means earth. You understand? Like, it means earth or earthling or thing of earth, right? So when it says I made man, we made man from a single soul, right? And we're saying we made Adam from earth, or we made Adam from earthling. We made an earthling from an earthling. Do you see how the Quran has deeper messages in it than what you can understand just taking it in its very literal sense in how it's speaking to you? Like, it's literally telling you that it's not saying that human beings were made from dust. Like, that's not what it's literally saying. But it is saying that our beginnings has something to do with being taken from something else and being created something new as a base from something else similar. That's what we're talking about, because we are also Adam or earthlings, right? And it's saying that we were made from earthling, right? Or the earth. We're the earth too. So what's really happening here? See what I'm saying? And then it talks about, it being altered. And this is why I named the stream Black Mud Altar. The Quran speaks about black mud altered a lot. So the question is, well, what are we altering? And why does it need to be altered? And what do you mean by black? Right? That word black has a lot to do with what has came down inside of these tablets, where it talks about creating the black-headed people, or being created by the black-headed people. Again, we have this dual creation where there's a creation being created from a creation, and this word black going back and forth and altering difference in terms of creation. I think that's very important to understand from the Quran, because it stands out very clear that these two things go hand in hand with understanding the Sumerian tablets in terms of something that happened that you will never see, because it's not a natural process, just in general. The things that we see here in the Quran that are very consistent, basically, and maybe it's more exotic, but I have kind of put this in general terms, is that we have blood, we have a divine substance, we also have something vibrating, and it's called dust or earth, right? Something moving, right? Now, as we know through the Hermetic principles, that all things are moving. So when we say, well, something is vibrating, you see what I'm saying, sounding clay. We're talking about something else. We're talking about something more mechanical now. When we talk about that movement, we're talking about just something slightly more mechanical. And we have to pay attention to the context here. We're not just saying that human beings were created separate, right? We're saying that there was a unique experience that brought them into being. You understand? That divine substance is not, in my opinion, a substance per se, but it can be a substance in combination with something else that we cannot understand at this point in time because we're just not there. We can interpret this in terms of the way let's say the way genetics is molded, but we will never know because these words are so rudimentary that we have to take everything with lots of salt, not a grain, but lots of salt in order to just keep it, keep it straight for us to understand as we speak, because there's a certain way we have to understand ideas before, as humans, we get confused. Now, I want to say that again, I spoke about the Quran speaking of Adam's creation as being explained, not in a lot of detail, but rather the fact that he has just been created from something of the same nature. And you can speculate that in terms of this being created from a different soul, as in like the non-physical part of something else, or the physical part of something else, because it does say in the biblical narrative that was not corrected in the Quranic narrative that the Elohim created mankind after themselves, meaning he was modeled after themselves. The only way you model a thing in this universe is genetically. So if the Quran is any type of indicator of what's going on, it's literally telling us that our modeling came from a specific being. And I'm talking about both Adam and his counterpart, his female counterpart, was created from the same soul, the same individual. Now, when we jump to and I'll come back to another point on that. When we jump to the Sumerian culture, we have this individual called Geshtu. You see what I'm saying? Or what is it called? It's Ilawela or Geshtu, one of the two. Both those names are interchangeable, but it means the god of intelligence. You understand? And this was an actual person in the epic, according to these stories. Now, there is room to, let's say, debate these stories in the epics and these tablets. But just generally speaking, according to the story, and I'll read the story just so we can have clarity, that this individual is how human beings came to be, meaning he was sacrificed and his blood was used to create human beings, to which there was other things that were put inside of a substance to bring human beings to be conscious beings. And I want to zone in on something specific in reference to that. So let me give you the context. Long story short, you have a group of people that traveled to this planet. This planet was where they needed what they needed for whatever they needed it for. They brought with them what they considered to be lesser persons from themselves. And this is a race of people generally called the Igigi, or the Watchers. The Igigi was the people that they're slaves that was assigned to doing the work on the planet in terms of the terraforming and the work that they needed done after the terraforming was done. However, these people rebelled against the people that came here that we call the ones from heaven, or the Anunnaki in the Sumerian creation myth. Now, they rebelled because they said, we don't want to do this anymore. We're tired, or whatever the case may be. Now, when that happened, there was this idea that they should be replaced and something else new should be placed on Earth that representative of these beings. This is the inception of humans in the creation myth. Going back to the Quran, and anyone can research any verse from the Quran in reference to this. The idea of the jinn is generally that the jinn existed on this planet before human beings. And while the jinn were here, for whatever reason, Allah was inside of a group meeting with some people like on the heights, on high, okay, wherever that is, in a different heaven, wherever that is, and they were having a conversation of creating a venerate or a new representative on earth for whatever reason. And and obviously we have understanding that the jinn were created just like human beings. They had good ones, bad ones, ones that were trying to live life right, ones that wasn't living life right, just a regular one. However, the inceptions of humans was something that the Quran doesn't go into detail about, but it tells you that these people that sat in this council with Allah, or the one who created, let's just say the one who created human beings or wanted to create human beings, they expressed to him essentially that the what you want to create is going to be a problem. Okay, like they're going to create bloodshed. They're not going to do what we need them to do. They're just going to be basically wild. And this is a bad idea. And according to the story, Allah says, "Well, no, 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 no. You don't know what I know. I know what I'm doing." You see what I'm saying? Now, mind you, when it's all said and done, that's exactly what happened. Bloodshed, and now the earth is where it's at. Get ready to die because we're on it. Yeah. So, with that being the case, you have Allah saying, "I'm going to place a new representative on the planet." And as a result of putting us on this planet, somehow the jinn are no longer seen here anymore. Now, some Muslims say that, there's been a veil put over our eyes so we don't see them, but they're still here. Not that that cannot be explained in some way, shape, form, or fashion. However, the general consensus here is that you have two stories and the concepts are the same in order. Okay? You have a people who are rebelled, and in the Quran, the jinn, and now they're being replaced with human beings. Now, I don't know how else to, juxtaposition that for people to see that we're talking about the same story, but there's slightly different names being called for different things, but it's the same concept, like just being played out. And I don't want to say, well, for instance, like some people say, well, the Quran is plagiarizing these different sources. No, the Quran is not plagiarizing these different sources. This is a message being given to a people in a way that they can understand it. It's not being plagiarized. It's just you're talking about a different language and a different people. But this story, it's giving you some insight into what actually happened. You understand? So where it talks about inside the Sumerian creation myth, where Enlil is like, listen, I can't deal with these Igigi like doing what they're doing. Basically, they according to the story, they burned all of their tools, right? And so they said, we're not doing any work. And he's like, oh no, something has to happen. I'm ready to kill all of you. Like, if you disobey me, I can replace you. Now, in the Quran, we have a similar idea that keeps floating around in the Quran, where Allah says repeatedly, quote unquote, that I can replace you if I want to in a blink of an eye. I don't need you. I can get rid of you. I can kill all of you. Like that just keeps coming up. And it's reminiscent of this individual and Lil, who is like, okay, I got you here to do this. You're not doing this, thus I don't need you. I can replace you. And then he does replace them. There is the replacing of the Igigi with human beings. So again, how is it that the Quran is not giving us a more in-depth understanding of the story of the Sumerian epic that we already know? You understand? And I personally feel that this is an upgrade in terms of the story, because there's little details that we don't know that didn't come down in the first story or the first three stories that is coming down inside of this message that literally lines up in terms of everything we understand. I don't see any contradiction. I just see details that might have been missing here, and some details that are not there that may have already been stated in prior books that we can kind of put together and say, okay, this makes sense in terms of who we are and what this means for our future. So I want to go further into this, right? Because it's interesting that in terms of how the Quran connects to the Sumerian story, in the first tablet, according to the Ashra Hassas, okay, that's a specific epic written on a specific tablet that they found. I think that is it's an unknown origin in terms of exactly where it comes from, but it comes out of, if I'm not mistaken, Babylonia. That could be Sumeria. But either case, the tablet goes on to say, Nintu made her voice heard and spoke to the gods. It is not proper for me to make him the work of Enkis. He makes everything pure. If he gives me clay, then I will do it. Enki made his voice heard and spoke to the great gods. On the 1st, 7th, and 15th of the month, I shall make a purification by washing. Then one god should be slaughtered, and the gods can be purified by immersion. Nintu mixed clay with his flesh and his blood. Then a god and a man will be mixed together in clay. Let us hear the drum beat forever after. Let a ghost come into existence from the god's flesh. Let her proclaim it as his living sign, and let the ghost exist so as to not forget. This comes from, and that's end quote. This comes from the Atrahasis. Now, this right here is talking about the creation of human beings, before the creation of human beings. So if you notice, right, you got the same prototype. You have blood, you have a person, okay, and you have there's other things that was also mixed into this, that it says that went into the creation of human beings in terms of spittle, right? And from what I understand in terms of the entire story is that human beings came into existence via the use of magic. This is what these tablets are saying, that incantations were stated, and as a result of this ritual and these words being spoken, as the Quran says, when quote unquote God speaks a thing, it is. We're still back at that point, words being spoken over humans, for humans to come into existence, and thus they do. So again, this story is being played out inside of the Quranic explanation of human existence, but yet it doesn't have the same overtones. So it's easy to not really understand what we're talking about here, because it doesn't have the same overtones. It is something that is seemingly hidden in a sense. But what message isn't hidden is what I would essentially say or question, right? Um to go further inside of this, right? Um just so we understand about these tablets and how they come to be, right? I'm gonna read something specific, and then I'm gonna go into the Quranic connection as it pertains to this, just to give you a bit of information. Coming from the tablets of Eridu, um, this is starting with the annihilation of human beings now. So first I read about the creation right before. Now I'm speaking about when there's the inception of destroying human beings. Okay. It says, I will stop the annihilation of my creatures, and I will return the people from their dwelling grounds. Let them build cities so that I may refresh myself in their shade. Let them lay the bricks of many cities in pure places. Let them establish places of divination in pure places. And then the fire quenching unknown is arranged. The divine rights and exalted powers are perfected, and the earth is irrigated. I will establish well-being there. After An, Enlil, Enki, and Ninhursag had fashioned the black-headed people, they also made animals multiply everywhere, and made herds of four-legged animals exist on the plains. End quote. Now, notice what this story is saying and what it's not saying. It's starting to go into the Noah story. You understand? And notice where it talks about the four-legged animals. That's interesting. Four-legged. Because we understand two-legged animals. Four-legged animals came into being, meaning mammals, the ones that we're used to, the ones that we have now. These are new things. They were not new things prior to this. This is a very new thing. and we're pretty new on this planet, to be honest with you, when you look at our genetics. um I want to say this as it pertains to the Quranic connection here, is that you have the Quran that speaks about why mankind had to be destroyed in terms of their wickedness, right? And that this was something that must have happened in order to cleanse everything, right? And then you have this thing where it's like there's this intercession, right? Like there's something that's happening, and then there's an intercession. And in the Quran, it's almost like Allah is the one that wants to kill human beings and the one that wants to save human beings and the one that intercedes on their behalf in between all of this, right? Now, this is where I would say the writer is attempting to understand the story without having all of the knowledge of prior stories before it. So it's a genuine effort to make it make sense, but it's clear that Allah is not the one on every front. Allah is not the one playing both things from the middle and the middle. Like that's not what's happening. So we have the same ideas, same concepts laid out in the Quran in terms of human beings having to be destroyed because there's something wrong with them, even though they were made perfect. Okay, there was something wrong with them, and then there's this idea that I will reestablish them someplace else. You understand? So it's like, I think that there's enough information here for us to kind of like parallel to say, okay, so even though it's not saying the same names per se, the meanings of the names are the same, and the concepts, in order that they are happening, the concepts are 100% match. So there's details in between each line, obviously between the two stories. However, when you take all the details out and you just put, generally speaking, what's happening, like in one sentence, it's all lining up. And I'll go on to say, like, for instance, like at the end of this whole situation, right, these quote unquote entities had took an oath that you're not going to intercept this flood, that, or whatever this is, you're going to stay out of it, and it's going to happen, right? It was an oath that was taken. If you notice that inside the biblical narrative and the Quranic narrative, there's this sense of oath taking as a result of Allah's intervention or like involvement in these events. And I just find that very interesting. Whereas again, the concepts exist in both stories, in both cultures. It's not an exact match in terms of the details, but the concepts are exactly matching up. And you wouldn't pay attention to that because it's like, okay, well, Allah took an oath that it would do this and do that, and then in the Bible it talks about that too, in different places. And it's like, okay, why an oath? Regardless of why the oath, the fact is this event that happened, however it happened, is something that is the same, whether we're talking about the Quran, the Bible, or the Sumerian creation epic tablets that's speaking about human origins. It's the same. So, again, my point in making this video is not to berate you guys with all of the examples in the Quran to this epic that is an exact match, but it's just to spark your interest to understand that the Quran is not exempt from having the same narrative as all the other books in the world in reference to our origin, and there being one cohesive story that we can understand coming out of this more ancient story that we hear that seems to be a bit too exotic for us to accept. You're talking about space beings, astronauts, genetic manipulation. You're talking about terraforming. You're talking about creating catastrophes like purposely. You're talking about space travel. You're talking about a lot of things here. And so, as much as people think that does not exist in the Quran, it does. Okay. It does. It very much does. Now, another issue too is this, and I want to go back to this inside of the Quran versus, the Sumerian creation myths. Inside of the creation myth, it makes clear that Ninhursag created human beings specifically, like she did that physical work. And inside of her physical work, she had did the magic that brought us into existence. Like we literally came into existence via magic. You understand? Like it was a woman who did that. And as much as I used to ask my mother when I was young, well, how did Adam come to be? Like, what did he exist in somebody's womb? Like, and did he grew up as a boy? Like, what happened? According to the Sumerian creation myth, he was created in a womb and he was born through a womb. Now, I'm not going to say that womb was something of a woman, right? Even though there are some myths that say that. I'm going to say that he was created in a womb in a natural way that people grow. So that whole belly button thing, oh, according to the Sumerian creation myths, oh yeah, Adam had a belly button. He did. He was very human, had a belly button and all of that. But was he connected as a baby to a mother? Or was he connected as a baby or human being to some sort of, I don't know, a medical apparatus that caused him to have to grow? Like, I can't say that for sure. However, okay, this is one of those things that is left out of the Quran, and it's been purposely left out of the Quran. It talks about the fact that they, again, the seed and the blood and the earth was congealed together, and it was placed in a place of resting. So it's not to say that he was created like on a table, and then somebody says some incantations and poof poof, there go Adam, he's a whole grown man. No, he actually grew as a baby. Hello. No problem. So for that one, I did see it on the text. Um, did you? Now I did. Hold on. Where is it? Oh, wait a minute. Okay, so I do have that sample up now. Um, and I did change it in terms of registration September 10th, return September 12th. I do have that change. Is there anything else you want to change on that? Um, yeah. Yeah, let me see what's that here. Class return. I'm gonna say class returns with an S, and just kind of set that up so the actual look like it fits. Yeah. Okay. Okay, I got class return September 12th. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Do you have that? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Oh, you mean with the plastic covering? Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I can save it. Okay. Ooh-cha. Okay. Do you want me to print this out, or do you want to have it to print it out? Okay. I'm saving it now. Mm-hmm. 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 Okay. Okay. Well, if they once they hit you back Monday, I mean, you'll be able to know exactly when they can, meet with you and do whatever they need to do for however long that is. Um, this is so complicated, but yeah. Um, guess it's just a waiting game till Monday then. Oh, this thing is still saving all this thing. Mhm. Do you have time next week that they can Wednesday? Okay. 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 Mhm. Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. They got to do something with you. Then yeah, that. I mean, NBA is more flexible in terms of I mean, days to to schedule.
Okay.
Oh, hold on. There's a line through here that I didn't think was there. I can't see it here. Hold on. I gotta reset. I got this. I'm looking at it, but there's a white line in it. I gotta find that white line. Hold on. Where is it? There it is. Let me take that out. All right, let me resave this again. Oi! All right, here we go. Do it again. All right, I'm gonna come back on. I'm about to send that to you. As soon as that updates. Here we go. All right, so let me send this. I'm gonna send this to your phone.
Okay. I call you my friends.
Okay.
All right.
Now, I want to go back to some in terms of how human beings came into existence. That is in accordance with the Quranic teaching, which is that words were used to create human beings. It wasn't just the physical apparatuses that came together to create them, as the Sumerian epics say that rituals and or incantations were stated to create human beings. Specifically, that human beings came into existence as a as a means of magic, or what we understand as magic. However, there's a this sense that what makes us special is our ability to invoke magic as beings, right? And so I find it interesting that magic, in terms of generally in the Quran, it's been prohibited, as well as in the biblical narrative. And from we can what we can understand in the Sumerian epic, human beings were treated in such a way that you can almost intuit that they were not allowed to understand magic, let alone practice it. And so the fact that we were brought into existence through this means, according to these stories, yet we're being told we're not being allowed to know this art. Yet this is who we are, literally at our physical core. This is who we are. We are literally walking magic. And we're being told, no, you cannot know that. Is reminiscent to me of the let's say the X-Men story, where Jean was not allowed to understand her true power because it was too powerful for even her to deal with, for her to even like to be able to contain, like period. So she had to be, let's say, um made ignorant of who she is for her own protection. Now, I'm not saying human beings were made ignorant for their own protection. What I am saying is that we have been made ignorant. Now, whether or not it's for our protection or not, that is still to be determined. But I found that to be very interesting because a lot of times inside of the Islamic faith, people take practicing arts, the magic arts, as an act of, let's say, insolence, meaning that you're saying that Allah does not exist, and you don't believe in a law, like you don't believe in God or something because you're practicing magic. Meanwhile, it says inside of the Quran that human beings came to know magic through two angels that came down and taught them magic. Now, of course, there's this idea that, well, yeah, God was just testing human beings to see, are you are you gonna really take this when I'm telling you it's bad for you? Meanwhile, there was no telling that it was bad at the time. I do believe that maybe this was a test to see if we were ready to understand magic and to actually like really indulge in it, given what we are and how we came to be. I will be honest with you. If I took the Quranic narrative in terms of the bringing things into be via magic, human beings are not at the point, generally speaking, where we have evolved to be mature enough to handle that. So when the Quran says this was a test, I believe that it probably was a test. Like I believe that. I don't know that to be the case, of course, because there's no indication that that actually happened. But when we like, there's no physical evidence that that actually happened. However, there's this story that says that at some point in time, what created us wanted to test us with magic. Now, why magic? You see what I'm saying? Like, why magic? Why even introduce that if it's going to hurt us in some way, and us not knowing about it is the best thing for us? The fact is, I think we were always meant to come into the knowledge of magic. not because it's just this thing that we're not supposed to do, and quote unquote the devil's tempting us with. No, we are supposed to understand magic and the depths of it. And when the angels came, it taught mankind, they taught mankind something that mankind didn't know prior. But this is how we came to be according to the stories. You understand? Even in the biblical narrative, it talks about the calling things into be. Like like it's talking about physical things happening and calling it into be, while other physical things are happening. There's this calling into be. Meanwhile, we're taking it as, well, God is just in some undifferentiated state and just saying some words. Meanwhile, God is not a thing that says words. What are we talking about? We're talking about actual beings stating incantations and putting together physical things, and we have come to be. At this stage in the game, we understand that we have the ability to literally create other human beings unlike us, because we have the ability to genetically manipulate a lot of things. And so the fact that we're still stuck on this idea that how we came to be was just this straight line, God called us into existence and somehow we just popped up and we just don't know. It's like this right here is what's keeping and holding us back. I truly believe if we could understand magic, like the depths of it, and then understand what part of ourselves is that very thing. You see, I think we could go further in terms of our evolution and at let's say, the maturity of who we are as a species, so that we could maybe graduate into something else. And I think that's where the Quran is actually leading us when it talks about when we get to a point where we travel space. We will only do that if we have permission to do that, meaning we're not going to be allowed to just willy-nilly go through space. That's not what that is. As far as the Quran is concerned, in several places, we're not going to be allowed to basically pollute other places in the universe until we are ready to come into that space and be part of it in a mature way. So I just thought it was interesting to bring that up, because I know a lot of people can kind of point to the idea that it was a woman that did the actual creating, and meanwhile there's this idea that in the Sumerian epic that Enki actually created, and yes, he did assist in certain ways, but as you see in the first tablet, the Adrahasa's tablet, that it's actually Ninhursag who was tasked with creating human beings. Now, I have heard personally in certain stories in West Africa about female deities being responsible for teaching mankind how, just basically how to be like civilized. However, I think that might be a remnant of this information, in that it wasn't just a female from some other place that came down and taught mankind how to be civilized, but rather she was the mother of mankind, and she taught us through how she created us to understand her. It's kind of a weird thing, but the Quran is not, let's say, absolved of supporting that message in many different ways, because as much as people would say, well, there's the Quran only speaks about one God, we're not talking about God right now, we're not talking about the creator. And when the Quran speaks about Allah, the female version of Allah, that at some point in their cosmology went hand in hand, this is to say that there's a misunderstanding of what we're talking about. Because if you have to say, do not believe in the female version of a thing, even though said thing created all things male and female, and it itself has to have some idea of male and female, or be male and female at the same time, this is creating a psychological conundrum that we really are purposely creating for ourselves, when we don't simply sit back and ponder on what the actual information is telling us. So as much as the Quran has been very scattered in terms of like a lot of detail, there's certain places where there's much detail for us to draw from, and I like that. So I just wanted to come in and give you guys that little bit of information, because it's important that we go beyond what we've been told and we kind of see things for ourselves. And so I'm not going to hold you. I'm going to let you get back to your Saturday. I have to actually get back to resting. But I will be back And trust me, more videos like this will come. This was one video I just decided to do on the fly. So, expect more, let's say, planned videos where it's more choreographed. But this is just me coming in because I just wanted to get something off my chest, and I'm tired. Okay, of laying down. I just have to sit up and do something different other than watch movies. I'm so tired of that right now. Sorry. I will see you guys the next time. Please take care, and above all, fly higher than these normal conversations. Okay. Bye.